Hello and welcome back to another episode. This is episode 3 and today we're going to focus on sculpting. We'll start with our default scene. We're going to go over to our tabs or modes. We're going to go to sculpt mode. Inside sculpt mode, you use the geometry you currently have. So this is a basic cube, so it's very low poly. So it has vertices on the corners and that's about it. Over here is all your sculpt tools. If you expand it by clicking and dragging, you can see what their names are, and each of them has a shortcut related to it. If you hover over, you can see the shortcut. So if I want to, let's say, grab, I'm going to press G. So let's go to G, and if I left click and drag, I can move this, same as what you would in edit mode. Now where this really gets fun is when you subdivide or have a very high mesh. High quality mesh. Now there's two ways of sculpting in Blender. You can either use the mesh you have and keep it the same topology and just adjust it, or you can do what we call dynamic topology, which adds and decreases the mesh as you sculpt as it's needed, which is very nice, but it can make your system lag as it will endlessly add detail to your current sculpt. So let's start with basic sculpting. So I'm going to go back to edit mode, select with everything selected. I'm going to right click and I'm going to go to subdivide. Click on subdivide. You'll see it subdivided at once. On the bottom here, you'll see a settings tab. I'm going to open it up and then the number of cuts, I'm going to increase it. Doesn't really matter, it's up to your choice. Now it has a limit of 10, but you can make it higher. I'm going to say 20. Then I just press enter. And there we go. We have a very high detailed mesh. I'm going to go from edit mode and I'm going to go into sculpt mode. So now when I, for example, go to grab, it only grabs this little point. It doesn't grab the entire thing. So it has a radius. To adjust this radius, I can press F and then move my cursor. And this is the radii that I'm adjusting. So now I have a bigger radius that I can influence. You also have strength, which is the little line. So if I press Shift F and again move, you can see the curve which my brush uses, as well as the strength of my brush. So I can, for example, make it very strong and very large and move a bunch of this cube. Or I can make it very large and very soft and only move a little bit of the cube. You can do the same with the smoothing tool, which is Shift S. You can use it to smooth out your geometry. Let's say we wanted to create a little ball. You can use this smoothing tool to make it a odd shaped little ball. But let's say that's too much for you. You can press Shift F and make it very slight smooth and just give it a quick pass. And there you have a little bit of smoothing. So you'll see the geometry, obviously, in terms of the shading. So if you right click on, if you go back to object mode, I think that's going to be easier. If you right click, you can say shade smooth and it will generate a smooth shading, or you can say shade flat so you can actually see the geometry. It depends on your preference. I prefer to say work on shade flat on most of the things that I work on so I can actually see the geometry. So we're going to go back to sculpt mode. There's a bunch of brushes that you can use to extrude your geometry, but this uses your base geometry. You'll see it'll start stretching eventually. Now this also sometimes affects the back of your geometry. So if I sculpt over here a bunch, it might affect this part as well. And that's what we call like a pass-through or see-through sculpting. But you'll see as I start sculpting this, it'll start stretching. So let's, for example, go to the crease tool, which is over here. Now, I'm going to press the F key to make my brush smaller. I'm going to add a very nice crease over here. And this is basically just pinching all the geometry together. I have no idea what I'm sculpting. I am literally playing with this tool. You can actually try and make a little egg if you like. Sculpting breakfast egg. But when we go back to our edit mode and look at the geometry, you'll see that it's not the same size. We have very pinched geometry over here, we have very straight geometry over here, we have very hard triangles forming over here, and it's just not uniform anymore. So once we UV unwrap this, it's gonna look very weird if we have the same texture in this square as we have on this square, for example, because it's not the same size at all. So you're gonna have resolution problems. Now, if you go back to our sculpt mode, and we turn on dynamic topology, you can also click here on these settings, and you can turn on dynamic topology. And here it tells you it will create vertices and it will edit your UVs, so it's gonna destroy everything. So it is a destructive workflow or setting to use, but it's very powerful, especially if you are creating high definition character models or something similar to that. And now, if I go to my clay strip tool and I click and drag, you can see it changes the geometry. If I zoom in, it creates high definition geometry for me, and I can keep sculpting and sculpting and sculpting and sculpting. I can go to the inflate brush and inflate this. And everywhere I have sculpted, so for example, let's go to the smooth brush, and I smooth. Everywhere I sculpted, it will create high res geometry, and where I haven't sculpted, it will stay the same. So if you go back to edit mode, you'll see this geometry is still square geometry, although it was triangulated. It's still the same resolution as it was, but this is a very higher geometry. Now it's not clean geometry. Again, you'll use this to sculpt a very nice looking face or creature or backpack or a tree or anything really, and then you'll retopologize for proper 3D animation or game design later on. Go back to sculpt. Okay, in sculpt you have different sculpting views. So if you go to material preview and you go to your drop down, you can set your light strength, you can set your HDRI, you can set if it needs to reflect or not reflect your scene lights or your world lights. You can go to your other basic view where you can add a matte cap, which is very nice for sculpting if you want to see certain details or shadows, or let's say you want to have it make it a reflective material. You can make it a very, let's say, a chrome material to see how it would reflect and how it would shine, to see all the little imperfections and dings and dangs more precise. Some material that I usually use when sculpting is this red. I like the way it changes the material, and the matte white, also a very nice material for me personally to sculpt in. But again, you can change it to flat lighting, you can change it to studio lighting, and then you can make it object or material specific. So if you have multiple objects in your scene, you can give each of them their own sculpt material. So let's say you are busy with the character's face and you're busy sculpting the eye, you can have the eye one color and the face or the eye socket another color, so you can see when they are intersecting or not intersecting correctly. And I think that is what I wanted to cover today. You can go through all of these tools. The main tools I use is the draw brush. Now each time you keep this in mind, each time you go in and out of sculpt mode into edit mode, dynamic topology is going to turn off by default. So you just have to reactivate it every time. This is just a safety feature, so you don't actually accidentally do something or change something in your UVs or so on, and then when you come back, it's broken because you forgot dynamic topology is on, and then it breaks your scene. Now another cool thing about dynamic topology, and this is a setting, it says relative detail. So if I zoom out, it's gonna lower the resolution of the object. But if I zoom in really, really much, it's gonna make this area a very high detailed little piece of mesh. So be careful for this, because now let's say I sculpted in very nice details over here. As soon as I zoom out and I give it a pass, it destroys that detail. you can change that by putting it to constant detail, and then it has a set resolution. So now, the smaller the number is, the higher the resolution is going to be. I think actually the larger the number. Yes, okay. The larger the number, the higher your detail is going to be. But be careful because again, you're adding geometry. So my computer is a very strong computer and it's already bugging out a little bit. You can see the loading screen. So if I go back again, it's going to disable. But if I go into edit mode, you'll see my mesh being completely black. And I mean, this is this is so detailed, it just baffles my mind. This is way too high detailed for a sculpt, and it's going to cause lag. So if you would like to see, for example, how much geometry your mesh has, underneath this drop down, you can see statistics. And on the top there, you can see this already has 1 million vertices, 1.1 or 500,000 vertices. It has 1.1 million faces and edges, and this is just going to cause massive computer lag. So for example, once you've done sculpting, you can unsubdivide, or you can remesh in the modifiers too, but that's something for another day. So go in, select your object, go to your modes over here, go into your sculpt mode, find the brush that you like, and start playing around. I'm going to go to 20 detail. I think it's too much over here. I'm going to go to clay strips. I think even this is too much detail. Let's take it lower to, let's say 5. And we can just sculpt over all of this to reduce the overall detail. There's also a very nice tool. If you set your strength to very, very low, you can basically go over this entire model and just lower its resolution, which is very, very, very helpful. Okay, I think that is it for today. So let's just quickly recap. I'm going to go to object mode. I'm going to delete this. I'm going to press Shift A. Now Shift A is the way you add in things to your scene. So Shift A, you have a bunch of settings. So we're going to go to mesh and then cube, and then we have our default cube. From our cube, we're going to go to object mode, and we're going to go to sculpt mode. We're going to enable dynamic topology. It's going to give us the warning. We're going to put it to constant detail and put it to 5. Go to clay strip, and now we can start sculpting. There we go. And now my sculpt is in the correct direction. There we go. So let's try another feature of sculpting. So you have symmetry. Let's do X symmetry. It's over here on the top. Whatever I do on the left is going to happen on the right. This is very nice when sculpting faces or doing something. Oh, what happened over here? Sculpting faces or doing something that requires.
Hello.